Hi, everyone. It's me, Scott Sandland, to do another Hypnothoughts Live interview with another one of our presenters. I'm going to introduce our guest in a moment. And as some of you know, I'm about to have a conversation with a presenter, and it's a sincere conversation with no script and no plans. He has no idea what I'm going to ask him. I don't really know what I'm going to ask him. We're just going to talk and get to know each other as people. Today, I'm interviewing a person that I've known for years. He studied hypnosis at HPTI a while back. He was awesome and went the extra mile, but most of you don't know that. Most of you know Joseph Onesta as the guy who did stand-up comedy last year at Hypnothoughts Live and said a bunch of really, really funny stuff about the process of seeing clients and other things as well. So, Joseph, how are you?
I am doing great. I'm so happy. I'm excited to be presenting this year. It's very, very exciting to me.
I'm excited to have you presenting this year. You know, you and I obviously known each other through HPTI and just the world of hypnosis for a little bit. And it's exciting to me to have people like you who have a not necessarily completely unique, but fresh perspective and outlook on the work. So it helps diversify the opinions in the room. And I really like the way you look at things.
Oh, great. I look at things unusually. I suppose I came to hypnosis late. I was very much a skeptic until, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago.
Sure.
When I realized that a hypnosis session that I had back in 1995 actually worked, and it was impressive. It came at a time in my life when I was thinking, what am I going to do? I need to move on to something else. I'm excited to be being older. I mean, I'm almost 60. I'm 58 right now. So, when I realized that hypnosis actually worked, I started looking, and I found HPTI, and it was perfect.
So you felt that there weren't enough white men in their 50s in the field of hypnosis, and you needed to remedy that for us?
I had no idea how many white men were anywhere, especially hypnosis. All I knew was that hypnosis had worked in a way that I hadn't expected. You know, I'd been a pastor, not a church pastor, but a minister for years, and I was looking for some way of literally doing that. I mean, I was actually thinking about taking on a church, which is, I will say, hellish. It's a huge amount of work, and you have to put up with a whole bunch of crap. And the part that I always liked about helping people was helping people, not running an organization. So
yeah. The administrative thing really gets in the way of the drive that you're going for.
Yeah, and I have to admit, and this might bother some folks, I'm not as religious as I once was. I mean, I can't say that I'm a terribly religious person. I know my theology, and I can help people in that context. But when it comes to hypnosis, I don't need to think about that. I can just think about being a human and helping humans, and that's so exciting. It's amazing.
So as I was thinking about talking to you today, and I don't script things, but I think about you.
Oh, sure.
And one of the things I was thinking about that you and I actually have in common is, I did stand up at the conference a couple years ago. You did it last year. And you and I are both the kind of people that are doing, and not a ton, you've done more than I have, but doing stand-up without venturing into the world of stage hypnosis. Now, I've taken classes in it, and I did it a few times, but that's not a draw for me. And I think there's that performer side, but I think the way that you and I have in our conversations about it, and just watching you, I think you and I come to comedy from a similar place that has a philosophical bend on it. Does that make sense to you?
It does. My first comedy teacher ran the class. It was almost therapeutic.
Yeah.
So as a comic, you kind of have to explore. You're writing your own material, first of all. And so it's coming from you and it's coming from your mind. And you kind of have to examine that and examine how others are going to react to it. And of course, when you bomb, they're rejecting you. It's not just like because it's you, it's your material. It's actually quite a challenge. And
Sure.
so I always saw comedy as a healing thing. And so did he. He's a great guy. Still runs a show at the Comedy Store.
Oh, okay.
And he's amazing. I'll plug him if I can.
Yeah.
His name is Adam Barnhart, and he does comedy at the Comedy Store. And he's an amazing guy.
So who are your comedic influences? Because whoever your comedic influences have to influence your thought process in life. So who's your Mount Rushmore? Who are your favorites?
Gosh, I have so many of them. I actually enjoy a lot of the British comics, believe it or not, even more than the Americans. Americans are kind of brash, and I love them, but British comics are very, they're a little bit, they show their personality just a little bit more. They're more like character actors. When I was a kid, every actor was a character actor, and you knew who they were, you knew who they were going to be in the show, you recognized them. So in comedy in Britain, they have that kind of persona, that character, that point of view. And so when I first started doing comedy, I did it as a lark, I did it just because it was on my bucket list. But when I learned about forming my perspective, my point of view, I sort of modeled it after a more frank, sort of almost befuddled person who was taken by surprise by the world. And that was my, gosh, this is crazy. And that's how I reacted to it. That's how I presented myself. If you want names, Sarah Millican is one of them that I just think is hysterical.
Yeah.
I love her. Lee Mack is another one. He's brilliant. I don't know if you know Lee Mack.
I do. I love Lee Mack on like the panel shows and things like that.
Yeah.
And, Would I Lie to You and 8 out of 10 Cats and those kinds of things. He's hilarious on that stuff.
Yeah, he's hysterical, and he's very bright.
Yeah, you have to be that kind of comic.
Yeah. He had a show of his own called Not Going Out, which required a little bit more affection for Lee Mack than I like the show, but I haven't binge watched it the way I've binge watched everything else.
Sure.
But I would say those are probably my heroes, those two. Sarah Millican, who just shocks you with her upfrontness, and Lee Mack, who just is so quick. He has to be an improvisation guy.
Yeah. And what you're talking about, number one is, improv, and the other one is this befuddled by the world premise, this persona, it really lends itself to the work we do, right?
It does.
So how much does that shape your style with clients?
My style, you mean the people I pick or the people that pick me?
Well, I mean, when you're doing actual hypnosis with a client in the room, how much are you doing an impression of Lee Mack, or how much are you doing your version of your comedic persona blended in? Let me try that question again.
Yeah, it's not working.
How much of your comedic persona is in your hypnotic hypnotherapy persona when you're with a one-on-one client?
In my reframes, when I'm reframing something that the client is talking about, I'm always going for a chuckle or a laugh.
Yeah.
Because I notice when they laugh, they relax, and when they relax, they're easier to work with. They're just so much happier. So when I reframe and they chuckle about it, which is, I mean, when you think about a lot of comedy, sorry, we seem to be having shakes here. When you think about comedy, a lot of comedy is basically a reframe that makes people go, oh, crap, that's right. That's amazing. So when I'm working with my clients and they're telling me things, I'll throw out little one-liners and they'll look at me And they'll laugh. I had one client look at me and say, you know, every time I come here, you peel me back like an onion. And it's like, no, I'm just, I'm just saying what I see, you know, what I'm experiencing and what I hear you saying. I want to make sure I understand you properly. And it's like, well, you're helping me understand me.
Yeah.
It's, all right, that's it. Good, good, good. Yeah.
So when I came up with the 3-Ha challenge for this a couple months ago, it actually came from a thought I heard from a British comedian, actually.
Really?
Jimmy Carr, and who is more brash, but
He's more brash, yeah.
but brilliant. I mean, a real thinker. And he talked about something that you just talked about, which is this idea that jokes in general are about a reframe and about looking at something. And that's where I came up with the aha, ha, ha, yee-haw, is this idea of how connected all three of those really are in what we do with clients. And so I just love that you're bringing up the same thing and validating my idea. That's good for me. So you have a background of being more of like a, what is your background? I'm not even going to say it. You say it.
I was an educator. I taught at universities. I taught English as a second language, composition. I was the language guy, studied language acquisition, which is where actually my philosophy of hypnosis comes from, because the way people acquire language is the way the unconscious mind forms ideas and rules.
So what's that? Wait, no, you don't get to just say that. That's interesting. You have to say more.
Okay. Well, the unconscious mind is always functioning. It functions from the moment you're born. Lots of our tribe will say even in utero it's functioning, and I'm okay with that. And it's always operating inductively. It's taking in all of the information that's available to it, making rules to follow the best way it sees possible, and uses those rules. Like, for example, when a kid is just laying on the ground listening to parents talk, he's not thinking about what they're saying. He's a baby in a carrier. Your little Lincoln is, how old is Lincoln now?
Lincoln just turned 3.
So has Lincoln said yet, I runned there or I catched the ball?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So those are common English mistakes that kids make. Where did they hear that? They didn't hear you say that. Your wife doesn't talk like that. Nobody talks like that. The unconscious mind formed a rule that said, if you're going to talk about something in the past, put a D or a T sound on it. And, of course, he can now comprehend the past. He's ready for that. So he says run or catched. You can try to correct it. It won't work.
Right.
But because he hears ran and caught and never hears run and catched, his unconscious mind will change the rule.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm working with my clients, I'm trying to look for the rules that they have and trying to give them the information, whether I'm using a metaphor or sometimes even direct suggestion works just as well.
Sure.
I'm looking for something that will help their unconscious mind change that rule. And sometimes I even say to the unconscious mind, are you ready to change that rule? And I'm waiting for a response. And I get it. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. So, okay, so I interrupted you. You were talking about your background in language acquisition and how that relates to hypnosis, but keep telling me about your background. What else happened?
Okay, so I'll be honest with you, and it sounds arrogant, I've always done everything I ever wanted to do. So when I...
That just sounds awesome to me personally.
Yeah, so I taught for 35 years. For a little while, I was a business consultant because that jazzed me. In 1995, which is how I was introduced to hypnosis, I quit teaching and I went and I worked at AIDS Project Los Angeles. I created a day program for people living with symptomatic HIV infection. And I had 2 volunteers, 2 hypnosis volunteers. I had lots of volunteers, but 2 of them were hypnotists. One was an elderly woman named Frances, who did one-on-one sessions, and the other, is Timothy Trujillo, who did a lot of work with AIDS. I remember when he walked into my office, and I'm going to make sure he sees this because it's funny. He walked into my office and told me that he believed that hypnosis could change DNA. And I thought, what a crackpot. But I needed volunteers, and he was pretty good looking at the time, and most of my clients were gay men. So I thought to myself, well, he's straight, but they won't care, and it'll be a good thing. And he started working with them, and they were over enthralled. I mean, they just loved everything he did. He taught self-hypnosis to them, and he walked on water for them. And when I first thought, maybe I should look at hypnosis for the next stage of my life, it was really because of Timothy and because of Francis. I was that kid in school that was picked on by literally everyone. And I was the school gay kid, and I would say it was abuse on a daily basis. Perhaps it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, but it felt that way to me. And so one day I was telling Frances about this and my fantasies of karate chopping them so they would stop picking on me. And she said, you ought to let me hypnotize you. And I went and I sat in her chair. It was free, and she put me in hypnosis. I found myself standing in a semicircle of middle school kids that I could recognize. They were all hurling spitballs and insults at me. And she asked me, what do you want to do? And I had my adult wisdom there. And I said, I just want to forgive them. She said, you won't hurt them. I said, I just want to forgive them. And we went through one by one. I could name every one of them. I remember this. Mm-hmm. I recall it from the session. I could name every one of them. And when she took me out, she emerged me. I walked out of there thinking this was the biggest bunch of crap I had ever seen in my life. But if the hypnotist, if the clients like her, great, I'm fine with that. And it wasn't until 25, almost 30 years later, when I got a call from one of those kids who was in a 12-step program wanting to make amends, confessing all sorts of things to me that I don't remember. And I said to him, dude, I'm really glad you're getting your life together. I remember you. I don't remember you doing any of this stuff to me. All I remember is we weren't pals. Like, I didn't hang out with you, but I remember you. And I'm glad you're getting your life together. Good luck if I can help you, whatever. And I let him go. But that sort of stunned me because as I sat down, I couldn't remember any of them, not any names at all. When I knew Francis, I could list them, but I couldn't remember any of them. And that was, I thought to myself, holy cow, it worked.
Yeah.
And that's when I started looking. I said, hypnosis is kind of like talking to people and helping them out. I mean, that was my first thought. It's kind of like that. Yep. And so I started looking at schools and how do I learn this? I found Timothy online. I said, Timothy, has this worked for you? Are you happy being a hypnotist? And not quite in those words. I was a little bit more delicate. But it's like, has this worked out for you? Or, are you washing dishes at the,
right,
at the diner? And he encouraged me. He pointed me to HPTI. He spoke very highly of you, and he spoke highly of Richard Nongard. And at the end of the day, I will tell you, I think I may have said this to you before. You had done this introductory class, and there was one moment, I was looking at another introductory class from another school as well, and you said something that so stuck me that I knew that there was no question where I was going to go. You said, we're dealing with real people and real problems, and we're here to help them. This isn't, I can't remember you saying this isn't a game, but that was this is serious stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is the teacher for me, boy. because I'm not interested in entertaining people. I'll use a convincer with skeptical people.
Right.
I don't need it with other people who come in and say, I'm ready, do it. I don't need that.
Right.
But I'll use convincers with skeptical people. But other than that, I'm here to help people.
So your whole life you've been doing whatever you want, and now you want to do hypnosis. How much hypnosis are you doing?
I'm full-time. I have 2 offices here in the city of Pittsburgh. That's because Pittsburghers don't like to drive across rivers, and we have them. But so I have to have 2 offices, 3 days in one, 3 days in another. Last year, moving to Pittsburgh was not good for my career. But last year, I made more money being a hypnotist than I have since I moved back to Pittsburgh 15 years ago. So financially, it's okay. I'm not exactly raking it in, but I am so happy. And I'm going to take on a couple of apprentices.
Look at that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
in getting to know you, and we've got only a little bit more time before I ask you questions about the classes you're teaching at Hypnothoughts Live, or the class you're teaching at Hypnothoughts Live, I should say. Before we get into that, like, if tomorrow you were struck by lightning, or you were, hit in the head, or whatever it was, and you couldn't do hypnosis anymore, what would you be doing with yourself? What would you spend your time on?
Gardening, probably, if I could. I love to garden. We're still looking for a piece of land for me to garden. If I don't get one, I'll use containers. But I'd rather think that if I can't pull my own weight, that would be a hard thing for me, financially and physically. So I don't know how long I'd hang around for that. One of the things that I learned, and I'm not saying I would off myself or something. Don't be ridiculous. But
I didn't assume that, by the way.
Okay, good.
I wasn't going to make a phone call right away or anything.
we call it 302 here. I don't know if it's that way all over the country. But
5150, I could make a quick call on that for you. But anyway.
So anyway, when I was at AIDS Project Los Angeles, and I watched literally hundreds and hundreds of people die.
Yeah.
And my mother, who was in her 70s at the time, she said, "You're going through in your life in your 30s what I'm going through in my 70s." Yeah. And it was true. So I'm not afraid of death. I'm not looking forward to it. It's not like I'm, can't wait. Right. But I'm not afraid of it. And I'm hoping I'm evolved enough, when I'm not able to contribute anymore, that I can just go. I don't know if that'll truly happen, but I've watched it happen with other people. So that experience of AIDS Project Los Angeles, as you know, one of my mentors was Michael Elner, who did a similar thing in New York. He did. And for many years, and had the same experience that you did of, that time and that disease was, was just devastating to populations. And to go through that, when I see clients dealing with grief, one of the things that I think about is you're not supposed to be good at that, right? Like, the only way to get good at something is through repetition and exposure and experience. Right. And grief is something that most people don't want to get good at. And I don't know if you are, or how good you are at grief, but how does any person keep going to work knowing that people you're working hard to help are absolutely going to die this week? Well, one is and it's a very simple frame. We're all going to die, and we don't know when. So, when I'm working with people that I know are going to die, my goal isn't really, let's get this in before it's too late, or, gosh, I'm going to lose you and it's going to tear me apart, which does happen. I get sad, but it's all about today. It's like, what are we going to do today?
Yeah.
There was a guy who came into my office at AIDS Project Los Angeles, and I had a bowl of candy there. And back in those days, lots of people didn't have a lot of money. And he found a particular candy in that bowl that he liked. And he kept reaching into the bowl. I'll never forget because it was so cute. He kept eating. He said, these are so good. And he ate literally every one of those candies out of a huge bowl.
Yeah.
And of course, people were wasting back then. The AZT was all we had. And it's like, honey, if you could eat that much sugar, go for it. Just go for it. And to me, it's all about, okay, we have time left. I don't know how much, but let's make it as sweet as that little candy for that guy. Let's live full.
So, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, that's it. Live full. No.
So one of the stories that Michael Elner told me that wasn't his, but he told it to me, so it's connected to him in my head. He wasn't the one having the conversation, but a counselor is sitting down talking with a terminal patient and says, "What's it like knowing that you're going to die?" And the client looks back and says, "What's it like pretending you aren't?" And a wonderful, a sort of shocking reframe, but it's true. It's an undefeated record of we better enjoy this because this is for fun, and helping others and having a good time is really what this is all about. And I think you do genuinely a good job of inspiring that mindset in others. And if I may, going through the HPTI program, it's a year-long program, or it was. It's shifted a bit now. But when you went through it, it was a year-long program where everyone was kind of getting together every week and talking and going through internship and all those things. And I think everyone looked forward to your take on the presenting client of the week because you came with good critical thinking, but also sincere positivity. And you do a good job of thinking critical without thinking negative, if that makes sense.
It does. I try. Yeah. I try not to be a moron. And while there are parts of me that are kind of woo-woo compared to others, I try to stay well-grounded. Even when I was in the ministry, we would say there are people who are so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. And so I always try to stay grounded. The fact is none of us know anything. We can say what we believe, but nobody knows anything.
Yeah, it becomes opinion pretty fast.
Yeah.
So you're giving a talk in Vegas on a thing that I think a lot of people are going to think they read the title wrong. What are you talking about?
Schema theory and hypnosis. Schema theory, in brief, is that the unconscious mind, when it's forming its rules, is actually forming structures that other things like behaviors, thoughts, and attitudes actually hang on. So if you see a skyscraper that's an odd shape, I can guarantee you there's a square in the middle of it. There's an infrastructure that things are hanging on. That a glass covered skyscraper, the glass isn't holding anything.
Right.
So there's a schema or schemata. Mm-hmm. There's more than one, and they use the word schemata. It was a guy named Vygotsky. It came out of language acquisition, which is where I got it,
right?
And reading theory. And at the time when he was talking, it was a lot of cultural stuff, but it's now grown into this structure in the brain that says, this is the way I react, this is the appropriate thing. So when we're dealing in our profession, if we're looking at scripts, for example, there are parts of the scripts that if I don't understand what's going on there, it's probably not a good idea, in my opinion, for me to use that.
Sure.
But if I know schema theory, and there's a guy named Jung who came up actually with, there's a whole sort of psychoanalysis kind of practice called schema therapy.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually identified a bunch of schemas. And if we use his or we use the ones that we come up with on our own, as long as we can see that clearly.
Those archetypes.
They're archetypes. They're very much like archetypes, but archetypal situations like I've lost perhaps my sense of security, perhaps my confidence, perhaps there's a fear about certain things, or I have a we call it low self-esteem, but it's my identity which I've built up that says I'm a piece of crap and I'm going to do my best. We have to get at that. And so when I'm, say, for example, if I'm looking at scripts, I'm looking at something and saying, oh, this addresses this part of this schema, or this addresses that. If I don't see that in my client, I'm not using that. Right. My client is talking to me, disclosing information. Every bit of it tells me something about the way he or she thinks, lives, and acts. And when I get that information, I can see certain things. I can ask them. Go ahead.
And so I would imagine that doing that allows you to approach a wider variety of clients with a confidence that you can find the patterns that make it familiar. So when a new issue is presented, you can find the schema or underlying structure that's similar to what you've done in the past.
Yes. And it's made me completely unafraid of difficult clients.
Right.
I'm not, when people call me up, there are things when people say certain things to me that initially, early in my practice, I would have simply said, I'm not qualified to deal with that. And now, while I still say I'm not a mental health professional, I make that very, very clear, I also know that there are certain things that I can help with, and I'm not afraid to do it.
Right.
So, for example, a young girl who came to me, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is an extremely complicated thing. And if you ask me about, dialectical behavioral therapy, I can't tell you more than a few sentences. But she came to me, we talked about what she was experiencing and what she wanted to change. Two things. One, she was cutting herself, and the other, she was blowing up at everybody that she loves and hurting their feelings, and she wanted to stop that.
Yeah.
So with the cutting, I taught her bilateral stimulation. Thank you, Melissa Tears, in that little book. I taught her I said, whenever you feel like cutting, you're going into your room anyway. Here's a little ball.
Right.
And just put your mind on the ball and switch it back and forth until the desire to cut yourself goes away. Just don't think about cutting yourself. She loved that. She thought that was great. And then I asked her, I said, do you know when you're going to blow up? She said, yes. It's like, well, how do you know? She said, my hands get warm. I said, all right, you have a natural stop sign. That's great. When you feel your hands get warm, excuse yourself. You're going to, you excuse yourself. Just say, my hands are getting warm, and go be by yourself.
But that's this sounds dumb, but it's so elegant, like just that question. Like, do you know when the problem's going to happen? Can you predict that problem behavior, just to call it, like just asking that question is such an elegant, simple way of getting at a potential resource that if you're caught up in the moment of that client, like, because those are big issues, and it's real easy to get inundated by the gravity of those and the complexity of all that, and to bring it to a simple question that allows you to move towards actionable steps or actionable insights is hugely beneficial.
It certainly is. And I think because my clients, I do what I was taught. Every time I have a client who's being seen by another therapist or seen by a doctor, I send them a note. Somehow that seems to be working, although the doctors aren't necessarily calling me. They are referring people. Yeah. And a local psychologist working with a client for anger management, literally, I never met this woman. I never talked to her. I don't even remember. There's no record of her in my files. I don't know how she heard about me. But she sent a client to me who literally would freak out and, endanger every relationship. She was completely a ball of anger. And again, I actually taught her this to control the ball with bilateral stimulation. And she swears by me. She said to me, and Scott, I say this without arrogance because it breaks my heart. She said, I've been in therapy since I was 8. The woman's in her 40s.
Sure.
I've been in therapy since I'm 8, and you're the first person to help me.
Yeah.
And it's like, I looked at her, I said, well, maybe everything they did got you ready.
Right. They were planting a lot of seeds for us.
Yeah, they got you ready. No, she was insistent. I said, well, okay, if that's what you want to think, that's okay. As long as I can help you, I'll help you.
Yeah.
And she's still seeing her therapist, so I'm okay.
Yep. So that's the kind of stuff you're going to be teaching people how to see, and a lens through which they can look at complex issues and new issues.
Questions to ask in their own thinking.
Yep.
I'll give them a list of those schemata that have been identified. They can adjust them for their own perception.
Sure.
We're not practicing schema therapy. We're just using the material.
Yep.
And then more importantly, the ability to look and say, okay, if I see this rule or if I see this schema, what do I do? How do I approach that? And so what if I'm a script user, then what part of the script do I need? If I'm going to make it up, what metaphor do I create to develop a sense of security or a sense of confidence or a sense of self-value? What do I do in creating that metaphor, or do I find a metaphor? But I know what I'm going after. I'm not just, oh, you have low self-esteem. That's page 43 in my script book. Let's see. This is a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I told you when my very first Hypnothoughts, I think I mentioned this to you. It kind of broke my heart when I was sitting in a session, and it became very clear that we were going to learn and not be handed a script, and a whole bunch of people just left.
Right.
I was like, oh wow! So you were going to take on this issue. In my mind, I actually got scared. You were going to take on this issue from an extremely superficial. You wanted a recipe that would fit everybody.
Yeah.
It scared me.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't know how to handle that. I was new.
and helping, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about having you as a presenter this year. Not just because of your affect, which is awesome, and not just because of your infectious, disarming nature, which is sincere and true, but because you think critically without being a critical person. And the idea that you want to help people be better at their jobs by using tools that make difficult things more approachable without trying to do their homework for them is exactly what this profession needs more of. So I want to say thank you for doing this today. I want to say thank you for just being who you are, and thank you for what you're going to be teaching at Hypnothoughts Live. To those of you who have heard this and said, oh, this sounds really fun, I'm going to check out his class, here's the sales pitch. Why don't you go take a class on schema therapy from a stand-up comedian who once hired Timothy Trujillo to work with AIDS patients? There's only one place you're going to get that, and it's in Joseph's class. Joseph, this has been fun. Is there anything you want to say to everybody before we go?
I want to say it is an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to be part of our tribe. And from stage hypnosis to clinical hypnotherapists, I love every one of us. I just think we do an amazing job. And Scott, I thank you for your integrity and your strength and your standing up for what's right. And, it's drive like yours that's going to take hypnosis from some, new age sideline therapy to frontline, first line therapy for people. And I'm so proud to be associated. Absolutely.
It goes both ways, and I sincerely mean that. Joseph, I will see you very soon. I'll talk to you sooner. Everybody else, I will see you next time on one of these.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.